The state of Tennessee had been trying to clear Route 64 above the Hiwassee Gorge since Tuesday morning. By Thursday, the crew from the Polk County Maintenance District had 44 hours in on a job their regional director's office said should have taken 8. An aggregate hauler, a 2019 Kenworth W900 running 78,000 pounds of crusher-run gravel from the Cleveland quarry, had gone off the road on the switchback curve at mile marker 31 when the April rain turned the cut slope shoulder to grease. The driver corrected right, overcorrected left, and the trailer pushed the tractor off the asphalt. The truck went down on its left side with the cab compressed against the rock face and the fuel tanks hanging 40 feet over the Hiwassee River. The driver broke his collarbone crawling out through the passenger window. The road closed in both directions before noon Tuesday. By Tuesday night, the backup stretched 14 miles toward Etowah. The recovery company out of Nashville had sent their best machine, a Century 1060 Rotator, on a Peterbilt 567 chassis. $460,000 of hydraulic engineering, the kind of equipment that moves overturned semis off interstate medians before the morning commute builds. The operator, Greg Cook, had 14 years on Rotators. He knew his machine better than most men know their own houses. But Route 64 above the gorge runs 17 feet wide at that switchback, and a Century 1060 needs 24 feet of solid roadbed to plant both outrigger sets safely. If you appreciate stories about old iron and the men who keep it running, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every one. The gorge side of the road had no room. The uphill side was a rock face that started at the asphalt edge. Every time Cook tried to position the Rotator for a left side pull, the right rear outrigger pad crossed off the road on a soft-cut slope, and the whole machine tilted toward the river. 3 degrees. He tried it 4 times on Tuesday and stopped. 3 degrees on a $460,000 machine 40 feet above the Hiwassee is not a number you push. He called Doyle from the cab and told him the geometry made the job unworkable without either widening the recovery zone or bringing in aerial equipment. Brett Doyle, the DOT project manager, was 44 years old with a structural engineering degree from Tennessee Tech and a decade running highway incident recoveries across the eastern part of the state. He had called his regional director twice. He had gotten a helicopter lift quote from a Chattanooga aviation company, looked at the number, and closed his laptop. His survey crew was sitting idle 30 miles north waiting on the road to open. He had a Federal Highway Administration inspection Monday morning and a bypass construction timeline with no float in it. Wednesday afternoon, he sat on the tailgate of his department truck, looked at the Kenworth hanging over the gorge, and ran out of ideas. Raymond Elkins heard Doyle's voice on the Polk County Emergency Channel Wednesday evening, describing the Rotator problem to the county coordinator. Heard Doyle say the road's too narrow and the shoulder won't hold weight. Elkins set his coffee down on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at his barn. He knew mile marker 31. He had worked that stretch of Route 64 for the Polk County Highway Department for 31 years. Patching, grading, clearing rock slides after hard winters. He knew what the face looked like above the switchback and what the gorge edge looked like from below. He thought about what his father had told him about that road in 1969. After pulling a county grader off almost the same spot with 30 feet of cable and an anchor point drilled into the mountain itself. He called the county coordinator at 7 Thursday morning, explained who he was, what he had, and why he thought he could position where the Rotator could not. The coordinator called Doyle. Doyle said send him up. To understand what happened that afternoon on Route 64, you have to start in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in 1947. The Sterling Motor Truck Company had been building heavy commercial vehicles since 1907. By the post-war years, they had found their market in the work that standard highway trucks weren't engineered for: oil field rigs, western timber haulers, mountain highway construction equipment. The 1947 Sterling Model 34 Wrecker came out of that same thinking. The frame was heavier gauge channel steel than any civilian recovery truck of the period, rated by Sterling's own engineers for sustained working loads that would fold a lighter chassis in rough terrain. The boom was fixed tower construction, single piece, 13 feet of vertical reach with a working capacity of 22 tons on a double line pull. Where modern rotator booms swing out horizontally and need wide outriggers to stay stable, the Stirling's fixed tower sent the load straight down through the frame into the rear axle. No hydraulic outriggers. No extendable boom. No need for 24 feet of flat road. The machine was designed to work in places where the road itself was the problem. Both winch drums were stacked vertically rather than side by side, which kept the overall machine width at 8 feet and 2 inches. On a 17-foot mountain road above a river gorge, those 8 feet and 2 inches were everything. Cleet Elkins, Raymond's father, bought the Stirling in April 1961 from a road construction company in Murphy, North Carolina, that was liquidating equipment after a federal highway contract wrapped up. He paid $900 cash and drove it home to Polk County in the rain on secondary roads. Cleet was 38 years old and had been running a one-man recovery and salvage business since 1954, working off a used International with more rust in it than steel. The Stirling was a different order of machine. He spent the first week on level ground learning how the two drums interacted before he put cable tension on anything real. For 22 years after that, Cleet worked the Stirling through the mountain counties. Timber trucks in creek beds, logging skidders off ridge roads, county equipment buried in spring mud on grades so steep that modern rotators wouldn't get quoted on the job. He never advertised. Word came because word moved through mountain communities the way water moves, quietly and steadily, always downhill toward whoever needed it. The word was simple. If your road won't hold what you brought, call Cleet Elkins. Cleet died in March 1983. Raymond was 33, working full-time for the county highway department, and he inherited the Stirling along with the barn and the 6 acres around it. He kept the machine the way his father had kept it, which meant using it. New hydraulic lines in 1989. A rebuilt transmission in 2001. Full engine overhaul in 2011 when the original 6-cylinder finally needed the cylinders bored out. The Stirling had been on real working jobs in every decade since Cleet bought it. By the spring of 2024, the machine was 77 years old, and Raymond could tell from the engine tone alone whether the winch oil was cold or warm. The crew on Route 64 heard it coming before they saw it. A low, steady diesel sound working up the mountain, different from the rotator's turbocharged pitch, slower and deeper, the sound of an engine that had learned not to hurry. Greg Cook was standing beside the Century 1060 when the Stirling came around the lower bend. He stopped talking mid-sentence. The machine was big in a way that took a moment to make sense of, big in a shape no one on that road had seen working before. The cab was flat-faced, angular, built when windshields were flat because curves and glass cost money the market wouldn't pay for. The boom rose behind it as a vertical tower, not a crane arm, not a rotator column, just a fixed steel tower with the authority of something that had never needed to adjust itself to fit the job. One of the younger flagmen said it quietly, to no one in particular, "What year is that?" Doyle walked over as Raymond parked behind the barrier tape and climbed down. The step off a Stirling running board is a long one, and Raymond took it with the careful deliberation of a man whose knees had spent 31 years on mountain grade work. "Mr. Elkins." Doyle extended his hand. "Brett Doyle, DOT. Appreciate you coming up." Raymond shook his hand and looked past him toward the Kenworth. "Mind if I walk it?" "Watch the gorge side shoulder. It's soft past the edge." Raymond spent 21 minutes on the site without saying anything. He walked the gorge side and studied the angle of the truck's fall. He walked the rock face side and looked at the stone above the switchback for 90 seconds without moving. He went 200 feet uphill and studied the grade. When he came back down to where Doyle was standing, Carson Webb had joined them. Carson was the structural engineer from the DOT's Cleveland office, 31 years old, laptop under his arm, the kind of careful professional who had already run the numbers and trusted them. "The rotator's issue is the outrigger spread," Carson said. "We know that. The question is what else could work here." "Road width," Raymond said. 17 feet at the switchback. "My machine is 8 feet too." Carson opened his laptop. "Width isn't the constraint. The constraint is anchor capacity. If you're pulling from below with the load vector working laterally, you need anchor points that can take the cross load without walking and the soil on the gorge side won't. I'll drill the rock face, Raymond said. 3/4-inch grade 8 bolts, 8-inch embedment in sound stone. I carry a rotary hammer. Carson looked at him over the laptop screen, looked at the machine behind the barrier tape. Greg Cook had walked over and was listening. I want to hear the pull plan, Cook said. Raymond pulled his cap off, ran his thumb along the brim once, and put it back on. Position the sterling below the truck on the level section, gorge side. Upper drum cable runs uphill through blocks on the rock anchor. Redirects back to the Kenworth's rear frame crossmember. Lower drum runs straight to the front frame at a 22-degree upward angle. Upper line walks the rear axle back to the road. Lower line takes the cab off the rock face. The truck rotates back onto the pavement. Cook considered that. If an anchor walks during the pull, I core test every bolt before I load it. You're welcome to stand there and watch. Doyle said nothing for a moment. Behind him, the entire crew had stopped working and was looking at the Sterling and the old man in front of it. The Century 1060 had sat idle for 2 days and cost $460,000 and had done nothing but demonstrate what the road would not allow. Raymond Elkins had driven up a mountain in a 77-year-old Sterling wrecker and asked if he could look at it. Doyle looked at Carson. Carson closed his laptop and gave a small nod that meant the mechanics were sound. Not that he was certain, but that he had no better answer. Cook said, I'll watch the drilling. If the anchors are solid, the pull geometry works on paper. Doyle looked at the Kenworth. For school buses had been diverted that morning. A fuel delivery to a logging camp up the mountain had been sitting at the lower closure since Wednesday. His surveying crew had been on standby for 40 hours. He looked at the Sterling one more time, at the fixed boom and the heavy frame and the flat face cab that had been built before his parents were born. All right, Mr. Elkins, he said. Show me what you've got. Raymond went to the Sterling's tool compartment first. He pulled out a rotary hammer, a canvas bag of 3/4-inch carbide bits, and 2 boxes of grade 8 anchor bolts with 8-inch shanks. He set them on the road and went back for the snatch blocks. 4 of them, heavy cast steel with fixed hooks, the kind manufactured in the early 1960s when working hardware was built by men who expected to use it for 40 years. He laid the blocks beside the bolts and stood looking at the rock face above the switchback for a long moment before he picked up the rotary hammer. Carson Webb came over. Where are the primaries going? Raymond pointed to 2 spots on the face, both above the Kenworth position, both in stone that showed a gray-brown density, meaning solid material behind the surface. Those 2, secondaries 3 feet left of each, offset so a single fracture plane can't walk both. How do you read the stone from here? Same way I've been reading it since 1978. Carson looked at his laptop. He didn't say anything else. Greg Cook watched Raymond drill the first anchor. The rotary hammer bit through surface limestone and into harder material beneath. Raymond drilled to depth, blew the hole clean with a can of compressed air from the tool compartment, threaded the bolt in by hand, and set it with a torque wrench to 210 foot-pounds. Then he clipped a load cell to the bolt head and pulled 4,000 pounds of tension against it for 90 seconds without letting up. The bolt did not move. That's the test. Cook said, that's the proof load. 4,000 for 90 seconds against the working direction. If it holds that, it'll hold the pull. Raymond moved to the second position and started drilling. You want to time it? Cook pulled out his phone. He timed it. The second bolt held 90 seconds without movement. He watched Raymond drill and set the 2 redundant anchors and proof test them the same way, one at a time, no shortcuts. All right, Cook said quietly, more to himself than anyone. All right. The full rigging took Raymond 2 hours and 9 minutes. He positioned the Sterling 140 feet below the Kenworth on the only level section of road available on the gorge side, angling the front axle against the rock face at a 15-degree diagonal, so the mountain itself became part of the braking platform. The primary cable came off the upper drum, ran uphill through 2 snatch blocks hung on the rock anchors, redirected back down to the Kenworth's rear frame. Raymond spent 14 minutes selecting the connection point, a crossmember behind the drive axle that would take a straight pull without distorting the frame geometry around the cab. The second cable ran from the lower drum at a 22-degree upward angle to the front frame, positioned to begin rotating the cab off the rock face as the first cable walked the rear axle back to the road. Neither line was designed to lift the truck. They were designed to walk it, to use the truck's own weight and the shape of its fall to guide it back the way it had come. Doyle watched from behind the barrier tape. His regional director called during the rigging and asked for a status update. Doyle looked at Raymond threading cable through the upper snatch block and said, "We have an alternative recovery in progress." The director asked what equipment was being used. Doyle looked at the Sterling's flat cab and the fixed tower and said, "A 1947 Sterling Model 34. I'll call you back." There was a pause on the line. Doyle, into the call. If you're hooked on this story, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. These old iron stories don't show up on the algorithm easily, and your support is what keeps them coming. Thank you. 6 men standing on a mountain road in April watching an old man rig a recovery by hand. No hydraulic boom positioning, no computer-assisted load distribution, no outrigger deployment sequence. Just cable running through blocks, bolts set in rock, a man who knew the angle he needed and was getting it. The crew had stopped talking somewhere around the time Raymond began running the primary cable and had not started again. Carson came to Raymond once during the rigging to ask about the cable rating. Raymond showed him the spool stamp. Military surplus wire rope, 3/4 inch, 26 strand, rated at 24 tons braking strength. Carson went back to his laptop, ran his load numbers, and did not come back. Raymond walked every cable when he finished. Checked each connection point, each block hook, each anchor bolt by hand. Looked at the angle the lower drum cable made with the Kenworth's front frame, decided it was 2 inches off the geometry he wanted, and moved the block uphill to correct it. He was not hurrying. Nobody said anything while he worked. Cook came over as Raymond was finishing the walk. 2 hours and 9 minutes of watching, and Cook was a professional who recognized careful work when he saw it. The redundant anchors, Cook said. "You think a primary might walk?" "No. I think if it did, I'd want to still be standing here when it happened." Cook nodded, said nothing for a moment. "Good rigging." Raymond looked at him. "Good machine on your rotator. Wrong road for it, that's all." That was the full exchange between them. Raymond climbed into the Sterling's cab. The seat had a split in the vinyl that Cleat had patched with electrical tape sometime in the mid-1970s, and Raymond had left alone because it held, and because some things you don't fix when they're not broken. The gauges came up in sequence as the engine turned over. Oil pressure, coolant temperature, then the winch hydraulic pressure, climbing steadily to its working range. The Sterling's engine did not rev. It idled at the same low RPM whether the drum was turning or not, a sound that had been the same on every mountain road since Cleat drove it home from Murphy in the rain in 1961. Raymond engaged the upper drum. The cable came taut in 12 seconds. The snatch blocks settled hard against the rock anchors. The Kenworth's rear frame crossmember took the load, and the Sterling's frame pressed down through the rear axle into the asphalt, all 22,000 pounds at pressing down and not lifting, the weight working the way Cleat had explained it when Raymond was 19 years old standing in the barn. When the load comes on, the truck gets heavier, not lighter, and heavier means grip, and grip means pull. For 38 seconds, nothing visible happened. Doyle stood 90 feet uphill with his hand resting on the barrier tape. Carson was beside him. Cook had moved to a position where he could see both the Sterling and the Kenworth at the same time. 3 of the flagmen were at the lower barrier looking up the road. Nobody was talking. Then the Kenworth moved. Not fast. The rear axle shifted maybe 5 inches toward the road surface, forward and slightly up, the mud breaking its seal around the dual tires with a low sucking sound that traveled across the gorge and came back off the rock face. Raymond held the tension, did not increase it, held it steady and let the truck's weight redistribute, let the mud release its grip at its own speed, let the load find its own way. Then he engaged the lower drum. The Kenworth's front frame took the second cable, and the cab began to rotate. Slowly, less than a degree at first, the crushed driver's door pulling away from the rock face with the sound of stressed metal releasing the pressure it had been holding for 44 hours. Carson took 2 steps forward. Doyle's hand tightened on the barrier tape. Raymond worked the 2 drums together, upper and lower, walking the truck in measured increments. 6 inches of rear axle travel, then 4 inches of cab rotation, then 6 more inches of axle travel. No surge, no overpower, no attempt to force the load faster than the ground would allow it. The way Cleat had worked the Sterling above the Ocoee River in the spring of 1971, when a county grader was buried to the axles in a hillside slide, and the operator had walked down the mountain rather than wait for a machine that might not come. The way you work when you know the machine and know the load and know the ground and have nothing left to prove to the people watching. The Kenworth's rear axle cleared the gorge edge 22 minutes after Raymond engaged the first drum. The cab cleared the rock face 9 minutes after that. 31 minutes from the moment the cable went taut, the Kenworth was rolling on all 6 axles toward level ground under its own weight, engine still running, the Sterling walking it uphill at 3 miles per hour in its lowest gear with a cable tension that Cook said afterward he would not have believed if he had not been standing there watching the gauge the entire time. Raymond set the parking brake when the Kenworth reached flat road. He shut down the winch, sat with the engine idling for a moment, then climbed out and began coiling the lower drum cable. He did not look up at the crew. He did not look at Doyle or Carson or any of the 6 men who had been standing on that road watching since he engaged the drum. He coiled cable the way he always coiled cable, starting from the connection end, working toward the drum, keeping the coil even. Doyle came down from the barrier. He stood watching Raymond work for a long time. Carson came with him, but stayed back a few feet. Cook came from the uphill side. "Mr. Elkins," Doyle said. Raymond kept coiling. "How much do we owe you?" Raymond pulled the lower block off the front frame connection and set it on the road. He looked at the Kenworth sitting upright on 4 flat tires on the closed highway. Then he looked at Doyle. "Nothing, sir. You just saved us the helicopter lift, the delay, and the Monday inspection. Your truck's out. Road opens tonight." Raymond picked up the block. "That's the job. I have to pay you something." Raymond pulled off his cap, smoothed the brim once, put it back on. He said, "My father bought this machine to work mountain roads." He didn't ask the rate before he rigged up. He walked the block back to the tool compartment and set it inside. "Buy your crew dinner. They've been up here long enough." That was the last full sentence Raymond Elkins said on Route 64 above the Hiwassee Gorge that afternoon. Cook walked to the Kenworth and put his hand on the frame rail behind the cab. He stood there for a moment with nothing to say and then walked back to his rotator, climbed into the operator's seat without starting the engine, and looked down the road at the Sterling sitting below. Carson Webb had opened his laptop again, but he was not typing. He was standing at the barrier with it open in his hands, looking at the Sterling's fixed tower boom against the April sky above the gorge. Doyle called his regional director back. He said the road would be open by nightfall. The director asked if the alternative recovery had worked. Doyle looked at the Sterling. "Yes," he said, "it worked." The director asked again what the machine was. Doyle said, "A 1947 Sterling. I'll send you the documentation." One of the flagmen, a man named Eddie who had been running the lower closure since Tuesday morning, said to the man standing next to him, "That old thing did it in 31 minutes. The other man said nothing. There was not much to add to 31 minutes. The road opened at 6:40 that evening. 14 miles of backed-up traffic moved through the switchback at mile marker 31, while Raymond drove the Sterling back down the mountain in 3rd gear. The same speed he had come up, the boom steady behind the cab, the engine making the same sound it had made on every mountain road since 1961. Brett Doyle filed his incident report Friday morning. Under recovery equipment used, he wrote, 1947 Sterling Model 34 wrecker, private operator, Raymond Elkins, Polk County. His regional director forwarded the report to the FHA office in Atlanta with a note attached. The FHA inspector who came Monday asked Doyle 3 separate times to confirm the year of the machine. Doyle confirmed it 3 times. The Century 1060 rotator went back to Nashville on a lowboy Friday afternoon. Precision Heavy Haul sent no invoice for the 2 days of failed positioning on Route 64. Doyle did not ask for one. Word moved through the county the way word moves in small mountain communities. By the following week, the story had reached the Polk County Historical Society, a retired highway engineer in Benton who had worked with Cleat Elkins in the 1970s, and a mechanic in Etowah who had watched Cleet pull a bulldozer off a ridge road in 1968 and never forgotten it. The mechanic drove out to Raymond's property and shook his hand and said Cleet would have been proud. Raymond said he appreciated that and offered him coffee. They drank in the barn with the Sterling parked between them and did not talk much, which was the right amount. The Tennessee Department of Transportation sent Raymond a formal letter of commendation 6 weeks after the recovery, signed by the regional director. Raymond read it once, folded it, and put in the same drawer where he kept the Sterling's original title document and the bill of sale from the Murphy Construction Company. April 1961, $900, Cleet Elkins, buyer. He was asked twice in the months after if he would consider donating the Sterling to a transportation museum in Nashville. He said no both times without explaining why. The Sterling was not a museum piece. It was a machine built to work mountain roads, and as long as Raymond Elkins was capable of drilling an anchor bolt into Tennessee limestone, that was what it would do. Cleet Elkins had kept the Sterling running for 22 years on the principle that the mountain counties needed equipment that could go where modern machines could not. Raymond had kept it running for 41 years on the same principle. Between them, father and son, they had put 63 years of work through a machine that had been built when working hard and lasting long were considered the same thing. The Kenworth was repaired and back in service by the end of May. The driver sent Raymond a card in the mail. It said thank you and nothing else, which was the right amount. Raymond Elkins still lives on the same 6 acres in Polk County. The Sterling is in the same barn where Cleet parked it in 1961. Raymond starts it twice a month to keep it alive, checks the hydraulic lines, greases the fittings, keeps the winch cable clean. On days when the scanner picks up a recovery call that sounds like rough terrain and a road too narrow for the modern equipment, he listens a little longer before he sets his coffee down. The engineers on Route 64 had the credentials and the $460,000 machine. Raymond Elkins had the Sterling and 63 years of the right mountain education. The Gorge knew which one mattered on that Thursday afternoon in April. Thank you for staying with this one to the end. If this story meant something to you, check out the other Iron Witnesses videos on your screen now. There's plenty more old iron with stories to tell. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see you at the next one.